In this tutorial, I'll provide a concise overview of Gaea 2. This tutorial is primarily aimed at beginners or those that have never used the software before. So I am using Gaea 2 Professional, but even if you're using the free community version, you will definitely still be able to follow along with this tutorial. And I've just started a blank project. So at the top, we've got our 3D viewport, and this is where the landscape preview is generated. Beneath that, we've got the graph. And this is where we place the various nodes that we need for generating our landscape. To the right of that, we've got a couple of other panels, properties, and our Modifier Stack panel. And I will go into more detail of these as we go along in this tutorial. I'm just going to hover over the edge between the 3D viewport and the graph, and I'm just going to drag it down to give the viewport more space. To actually move or rotate the landscape, if you hold Alt on your keyboard and left hold the mouse button and then just move the mouse around, it'll move and rotate the landscape. If you hold Alt and the middle mouse button, you can reposition the landscape, and then just scrolling the middle mouse wheel, assuming you have one, you can use that to zoom in and out. So Gaea has got a streamlined workflow, and we can start with primitive landscapes or basic shapes. For example, if I click on the primitive category, it offers some basic primitives. If you don't have these categories already expanded, if you go to Tools and Options, and then if you go to the toolbox, you've got Nested by Family or Show All. So you can just make sure that Show All is clicked, and then they're going to already be expanded without having to click on the different subsections again. In this category, we've also got options for importing files. So we could import a texture file like a noise map. There's also an option for importing objects, so we can import object models. This is really useful if you want to have a very specific model or shape. You can import it in. For example, you could sculpt a landscape in Blender, and then you can, after exporting that from Blender, you can import that into Gaea and work on it further. It's not actually been implemented yet, so this doesn't work, this object option, but hopefully that will be implemented and finished off soon. So now if we click on the terrain category, it brings up some primitive terrain options such as mountain or mountainside, and also some landscape options as well, like mountain range. We'll just use mountain. Before we click on that, you may have noticed on the right hand side there's some abbreviations. Not all the options, most of them have these abbreviations. So mountain has got M, and we can use that in the search function, and it can really speed up searching for these specific nodes. Before we do that, if you just click on mountain, that's how you can add a node, as simple as that. And you can see it's already generated what's looking like a pretty decent mountain. But let me show you the second way that you can add mountain nodes. If you just select this then and delete it, the preview will stay showing as a mountain for now until we add another node. That's fine, we can ignore that for now. So to bring up the search function, you can just right click and you can search for M. And at the top it brings up mountain. Now what's great with this search function is we can string a bunch of nodes together. So if you press comma, it's added mountain, and now it's given us the option for adding further nodes. So it's got erosion there, which is E2. So if you just search for E2 and then add a comma, we've got those two options added, and you can continue to add further nodes altogether. Now, you don't have to use the abbreviations. For example, I could just search for Perlin, and it brings up Perlin. So you can do the abbreviation or the name. So I'm just going to delete that Perlin and also the comma there as well. So we should just have mountain, comma, erosion 2, and then press enter. And it adds them both, and they're already connected, which is super useful. Now, aside from using the search and just stringing some nodes together, you can very simply drag off from nodes. So if you add a node like the mountain node, drag off from the out socket, let go, and then you can search for erosion, or you can search for rock, and then just press enter to add that node in. But let's just delete that one, and we'll just stick with these two nodes here. Also, if you select erosion 2 node, you can see the final preview of these two nodes. If you just want to see the mountain preview, just left click on the mountain node. Now, if you wanted to alter the properties and the shape and the layout of the mountain, with that node selected on the right hand side, we've got its properties, and we can, for example, reduce its scale so it won't cover as much area or increase its scale, so it's a bigger mountain covering a large area. Let's keep this fairly centered. So about in scale, we could have about 0.47. In height, we could increase the height maybe up to 1.9. Then we've got a nice mountain sitting in the middle of the landscape. So now we can click on erosion, and then that adds this additional erosion. It's got a lot more down cutting, or it's got these kind of gullies. If you wanted to reduce the strength of the erosion, of course, back in our properties panel, we're going to hover over down cutting. So I'm just holding the left mouse button and I'm just dragging it down, and that just reduces the strength of the down cutting. And the duration, or the estimated duration, how long has the erosion been happening for, we can reduce that. And then that also just reduces the amount of erosion. A lot of these properties, not all of them I'll say, but a lot of them are fairly intuitive. And what's great is if you don't understand or don't immediately see what it does, you can just play around with the properties and see the effect that it has as you're learning this. Now let's just say if you wanted to change the shape of the mountain, but you still wanted to see the effects of erosion, and we can easily do that. If you select erosion, you can right click on it and it says lock preview, or F. So you can just press F for lock preview, and then you get this little green icon which shows it's locked. Now what's going to happen, even if I click on mountain, it's still got the full preview up to that node, up to erosion 2. So I can now change the scale of the mountain, but I'm still getting that preview with the erosion applied, which is so useful. I use this all the time. But let's just increase the scale. The exact settings don't matter here. Feel free to play around with these further if you wish. I'm going to keep scale at 0.48 and height at 1.88. And perhaps instead of using old, so it does give us some basic types of mountain, I'm going to select eroded to make it give it even more detail and to make it an even older mountain. And I can select erosion, and this time I'm going to press F, and that releases that locked or that forced preview. So before moving on, we're just going to look at the resolution preview. So at the moment it's fairly low resolution, but at the top we've got something that says 1K. It's also on the right hand side as well. But if we click on either one of those, we can see the preview resolution is 1K. We can go up to 4K, so you can select 4K. And as you can see, we've now got this really nicely defined, realistic landscape. Now, generally speaking, you won't work in 4K because it takes longer to load the nodes and to process the changes. So generally I will work in either 1K or 2K. Mainly I will work in 2K. Just one important point about this is that when you change resolutions, especially going from 1K up to 4K, it can change some of the layout of the landscape. Because it's a procedurally generated landscape, changing the resolution can actually change some elements of the shape of it. So do check your high resolution as you go along. Generally I work in 2K, and every now and again I'll check 4K, and then I'll go back to 2K to continue working. If I just click on mountain again, and on the right hand side in this properties panel at the bottom we also have something called a modifier stack. You can hover over these things and it gives us further control to modify the shape and the look of whatever node we have selected. So for example, if I click on the shaper node and I drag up shaper, it starts to create a more bulky mountain. You can drag it backwards and it reduces the bulk but makes it really pointy, so we can have a very kind of pointy, almost fantasy-like mountain. And then there's a whole array of other options here. For example, we've also got invert. So you can invert your mountain, and then instead of it going up into the sky, it goes down and creates a great kind of chasm or hole in your landscape. But for this tutorial, let's just get rid of these modifiers so we can hover over them and click on the little X, and we'll just stick with our properties for this tutorial. So we won't edit this mountain any further. We'll leave it as it is, but we will have a short overview of the other categories that we've got. So after we have added our primitives or our landscape nodes, there is then a modifier category, and as it says, you can use it to modify the nodes that you've placed. So we have things like blur, swirl. There is a range of effects here. Another useful one is transform. Transform is you can just shift the position of the connected node. So for example, you can place this after the mountain node, and then you can move the mountain left or right or to the side or the other side, etc. So that's a modify section. Then we've got the surface section, and this basically allows for editing the primitive or the landscape node, but placing edits on top, so to speak. So in stones, or you could shatter it, or you can add in stratify or terraces, and so forth. Simulate is primarily erosion or water effects. So the derive category literally derives information from the previous nodes that have already been placed in the graph. So for example, you could use the texture base and plug that into the erosion. So it would derive the information for the height map or the model, the mesh, that could be exported for texturing it. We can also create normal, so you can derive a normal from the height map information as well. So colorize, pretty much as you can guess, you can add color and you can texture your node setup ready for when you export it out as a height map or as a static mesh. After that, we've got output, and this is where you've got various outputs, such as outputting a static mesh, which is mesher, and so forth. Finally, you've got utility, which is additional tools or nodes for editing the map. For example, here you've got seamless, and you can create a seamless height map. So to texture our mountain, there are a couple of different ways in which we can lay out the texture nodes. We can actually have more than one graph. So this is just graph one. If you right click to the right of that and then click new tab, it creates a second graph, and we can add our texture nodes in here, and then we can connect the different graphs together via portals, which we will touch upon very shortly. You can actually have multiple graphs, so if you create a much more complex landscape, then you can separate the different parts of it, maybe the base and the surfaces, etc., into different graphs. But for this, let's just right click on it and delete it, and let's just stay within one graph. So there appears to be a bit of a bug. The preview of the nodes in the graph disappears, and I've not been able to get them back. So what we have to do is go to File and Save As, and then just save this as, you could save it as like first tutorial, something like that, and then save it. So then once you've saved it, we can just close down Gaea. We'll close it down, then open it up again. Now we can open a saved project, and then we're back where we started from. So we won't be using a second graph, we'll just stick for this within the one graph. Now we can just hold the left mouse button over the output for erosion 2 and drag off, and then let go, and then we can add our texture nodes this way. However, it can get a little bit messy doing that, and you can get very long chains of nodes. So instead of having a long sequence or long chain of nodes, let's use portals. So left click on erosion, click on P, and then where it says convert to portal on out, we want to connect a portal to the out socket. So click on that, and now we've got a portal there. And now we can connect other textures into this portal, and a portal is basically like a link or a bridge between different nodes without having to use a connection line. So now that we've got our portal set up, just beneath the mountain node, I'm going to right click and search for texture base and select texture base. When you select this, nothing will happen at first. We need to plug it into the portal. So with that node selected, press P, connect to portal, select the in socket. We've only got one portal, the portal we just created, so select that, it's erosion 2, and now it's created a texture-based mask, and this basically details all the detail in the landscape, and then we can use that as a base for adding set maps or some other nodes to add color to the landscape. So let's drag out of texture base, and we want a sat map. You can search for it, but it shows it there by default because it knows that's one of the main nodes that we use with texture bases. So select sat map, and then it will add set map color palette by default. So for the first sat map, I'm just going to want grey for the mountain. So that's not really what I'm looking for. So let's have a look. And in fact, 153 looks pretty good. Now we've got a couple of options here in processing. We've got auto level or equalize. If you press equalize, you can increase the contrast between the different details in the sat map, but that's not really helping in this case. I think I'm just going to leave it like that. It's already adding some nice variation to the mountain area, which is good. I'm going to leave that at 153, and everything else, well, the other settings can be left on default. Texture base again, let's drag out again from the out socket and search for satmap. This time in the properties, let's select green, and we just want a nice green color palette. So I'm just going to scroll through, select a few. That looks all right. 1, 2, 1. So green color palette 1 to 1. You don't have to do the exact same color palettes that I've chosen, but I will go with those ones. Let's stick with the default settings. You have got a slider here where you can limit the array of the different variations in the color palette, but you can just drag it backwards and forwards. I'm going to keep both of these set maps to the full array. And now let's combine them together. So I'm going to drag out of the out socket and plug that into the bottom out socket on the set map, and it adds a combine node. You can search for these combine nodes and add them through the search menu, but that's a quicker way to do it. And there's a bunch of different options in the properties that we can change. Some of these you may already be familiar with, things like add or multiply, but we're just going to stick with blend. So at the moment, it's just blending these two sat maps together. But what I want is, on the slopes, I want the gray area, and on these flat bottom areas I want the green area. To do that, we can add a mask, and specifically we can add a slope mask. So in the combine node, if I hover my mouse over the bottom socket, which is a mask socket, drag off of that and search for slope, and then I'm just going to add a slope. Now this won't do anything at first because it needs information about the landscape, about the heights and the depth and the details of the landscape. To get that, again, we just use the portal. So press P, select the connector portal, select in, and then select erosion 2. We can change the name of those portals, which we'll do at the end when we come to exporting. For now, we'll keep it as it is. And we've got now, as you can see, with it selected, we have got a grayscale mask. So how this works is that basically these white or the lighter areas are where the green sat map is going to show through. Now, if we go back and click on combine, you can see it's already working. We have got a lovely grey area on the slopes, and we've got this green, luscious, more luscious area on the ground, the bottom area, the flat area, and also some of the more soft slopes as well. Now, if you want to change that blend, but you don't want to go back, you don't want to see it just as the mask, we can use the false preview option again, but this time select the combine node, press F. So now when we select the slope, it still shows us our combined sat maps, and now we can play around with the properties and slope. And if we hover over the range, that's the second bar in the range field, and drag it down, it increases the amount of the grey sat map that's showing. If we drag it up, go too high, it basically gets rid of it. So I'm fairly happy with that. I might drag it down a little bit. We've also got fall off, which is basically the blend between the two sat maps. The higher the fall off, the more blend you get. I'm going to keep it like that. Feel free though to tweak the settings as you wish. One other thing I can mention is the blend. The ratio of the blend is still set to 50-50. You can, now we've got this mask, we can actually increase the blend up to 1, and that basically removes any blend, but we've still got the different sat maps showing through the different areas of the black and white, or the light and dark areas of the mask. That looks a little bit harsh. I prefer a bit of a blend, so I'm just going to drop it down just so I keep some of the blend there. 0.6, there you go. So before we go on to exporting out the height maps for this landscape, let's just have a quick look at the lighting. So there are some lighting options just to the right of the viewport. Fairly self-explanatory. We have things like exposure. We can make the view a little brighter, sun intensity, a similar effect. And you've got some other things like haze and ozone and fog density. These options here are affected more by the skybox option, so you can add a skybox that add a more ambient realistic effect. to see how it looks. Let's keep that off. Just going back into the lighting options, you can also change the angle of the sun as well. I'll just keep it pretty much how it was though. So that's all great. Let's just go to File and save this. Or there's a save icon shortcut there you can use. Now to export out this landscape, this mountain landscape as a height map, what we need to do is first, in erosion, you can right click on it and simply mark for export. And it gets this yellow icon here. And if you go into the build to the right of the graph, it actually shows what nodes we've got marked for export. Now, because this node erosion is at the end of this sequence of nodes, it's going to export out everything at this point. So it will give us our complete landscape height map. But we also want the color as well, the texture. For that, we can export out the combine. So right click on the combine and then click on mark for export. Now they've got their names, they've got erosion 2 and combine. So when we export these out, that's what they're going to get called. We can actually change the names of nodes. So just select the node and press F2. You could keep it as erosion, and we can do final height map, let's say. And then press enter. And it will say, do you want to update the file name to match the new node name? And click yes. So when this gets exported out, that file, that texture file, is going to have that name. And we can do the same with combine. Right click on it. Or you could do rename or just press F2. In this case, I'll do rename. You can keep it as combine, but you could call this diffuse. And then click yes. Okay, that's great. You can also, I think I mentioned earlier about the portal, if you click on P. So touching upon what I mentioned earlier about changing the name of the portal as well, if you go to the texture base, click P, if you disconnect the portal, click P again, make sure texture base is still selected, and then press P. And then in the in socket, it has changed the name of the portal as well, so erosion final height map. Now to the right of the graph, we've got the 2 textures that we're going to export. I don't want them as EXRs. You can, of course. Now these options are going to be really dependent on what you're looking for or what the next program you're going to use, what files it accepts. Like Unreal Engine doesn't accept EXRs as landscape height maps. It does accept PNGs. So let's select PNG 16. If maybe you're doing a cinematic or an animation or just a static scene you're going to take some renders from, then you could select a much higher quality texture. But PNG 16 is pretty good. So before we come into actually exporting these textures out, we need to change some settings. So we can click on the blue box, or you can go to Project and Build Settings, but the blue icon or the blue box icon is quicker. Because I'm using professional, I've got a whole array of different resolutions up to 256, which is really quite impressive, but that will be a huge file and will take a long time to build. So be in fairly unique circumstances that you would actually use that setting, but it's great to have it. For this, I'm just going to use 4K. Everything else here I'll keep as the default settings. Let's just go to build, and this is where we can change the actual destination for where the texture files get outputted to. So just click on the field or the box here that's got 3 dots, and then you can change the folder they get exported to. By default, it does have a default folder. A lot of the time you're probably going to change that though. I'll just keep it as that is. I'm going to close it down. So now all we need to do is just click on build. It gives us some information here about building. We can actually save RAM and GPU memory by closing the interface and building, but I'll just click on start build, and then it'll build the height maps. So when the build finishes, it'll open the folder for where the textures have been saved to. And I can see that I've got the combined diffuse or the diffuse map, and I've also got the height map. Now there are 3 other textures here as well. It says erosion deposits and erosion final flow. And you may be wondering what those other height maps or masks are doing there. Basically, whatever node you mark for export, if it's got additional outputs, as the erosion node does, like flow and wear, it'll export those as well. So that's why those are added there. And they can be very useful as additional masks, and you can mask off other areas of materials or textures in the end program that you're using. For this, we don't actually need them, so I'm just going to select them and delete them. Now, if you don't want to export them at all to begin with, let me just drag that folder of there, back in Gaea, where it's got erosion, final height map. It's got a little drop down field, and we can just deselect flow, wear, and deposits, and we just want those two. So that now brings us to the end of this introductory tutorial. As you may imagine, this is a very concise overview. We've only really touched upon Gaea and its capabilities, but this will get you up and running. If you've got any questions or even requests, please do leave them in the comment section. Thank you.